The Liberal government's budget survived a second confidence vote today. MPs voted down a Bloc Québécois amendment that could have triggered an election. That sets the stage for a vote on the budget itself later this month. The CBC's Olivia Stefanovic joins me live. So, Olivia, take us through what happened in the House earlier this afternoon.
Well, Andrew, the Liberals have cleared their second confidence vote on the federal budget, which means we won't have a federal election, at least for now. This amendment was brought forward by the Bloc Québécois, which called on the House of Commons to reject the budget while also requesting a number of changes to the document itself. And along with Bloc MPs who stood up to vote in favor of this amendment, we also saw New Democrats vote in favor of this Bloc amendment as well. And we have a statement to show you from interim NDP leader Don Davies that explains why New Democrats decided to vote in favor of this motion. Davies says that New Democrats share the concerns expressed by the Bloc in the motion voted on today. In particular, Davies says that we want to see increased healthcare funding, better support for seniors, and climate action. On that basis, we supported the motion. Now, Davies goes on to say in this statement, Andrew, that this doesn't necessarily mean that the NDP will vote against the budget for the budget vote, which will happen in about a week's time from now. Davies says that the NDP is still doing consultations, will take this week off to speak to more Canadians and make a decision after that. Now, this vote on the budget, the next confidence vote, will take place on Monday, November 17th, after MPs return from a one-week recess to the House of Commons. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has expressed concern about the budget, about the large deficit here. And here's what he's saying about what may lie ahead.
It's hard to say. The NDP and Bloc both voted against our opposition motion. I don't think that we're going to end up voting for their motion on amending the budget. And so it will depend over the next several days what decisions are made by the various opposition parties. I mean, this really is a budget that the NDP and Bloc would be aligned with because it is a big spending budget. So I would not be surprised to see them vote for all of that spending.
So Poilievre there speculating about what might happen when that vote happens on the budget itself and whether the House of Commons could end up seeing the government fall and the government heading into a federal election. Poilievre there signaling that he believed his party would vote against the Bloc amendment. That ended up happening. The Conservatives stood up and voted against this amendment by the Bloc Québécois on the federal budget, as did the Liberals. They rejected this amendment since it called on the House to reject the budget. The Conservatives took issue with the wording in the actual amendment by the Bloc Québécois. And I'll note that it's not usually the third party, the Bloc, that would make an amendment to the budget. This usually falls on the official opposition itself, so the Conservatives. But what happened earlier this week is that Poilievre missed his opportunity to move an amendment, so the Bloc did instead. And the Conservatives were left with having to make a sub-amendment to the Bloc Québécois amendment, and that failed.
And Olivia, that vote unfolded as the Conservatives are dealing with a departure of two of their MPs this week, one who crossed the floor, another one who is resigning. So what exactly is going on?
Well, the party is in damage control. We saw House Leader Andrew Scheer speak to reporters earlier today after question period, trying to bring the focus back on the Conservatives' main message, criticizing the Liberals for their budget and trying to quash any suggestion that there could be more floor crossings and trying to quash rumors as well that Scheer's colleague Matt Genereux from Alberta, that he was planning to defect to the Liberals and that he may have had concerns with the leader himself, Poilievre. Let's have a listen now to what Scheer had to tell reporters.
Referring to Mr. Genereux's statement, he said that this was a long-standing decision that I believe came to a head because of these Liberal tactics. I believe that Matt Genereux has had to make this decision known earlier because of these Liberal pressure tactics that I mentioned. I mean, he's been the victim of some of these Liberal-sourced fueled rumors.
Now, Genereux announced his resignation yesterday evening while the first confidence vote on the federal budget was happening. This was the vote that was the sub-amendment brought forward by the Conservative Party itself. And in this first statement, Genereux only made a passing reference to Poilievre. And this raised a lot of questions, especially since his colleague Chris D'Entremont, who defected to the Liberals earlier this week on Budget Day, he cited that one of his main reasons for leaving the Conservatives was that he had an issue with Poilievre's leadership. Then hours later yesterday evening, we saw from the Conservative Party itself, it released a statement from its official channels saying that Genereux had a great chat with Poilievre and that he wished Poilievre well, and that this had nothing to do with his dissatisfaction essentially with the party. Genereux went on to say that there was no coercion involved, but still, Andrew, there are many questions here about what actually happened, and we're still waiting to hear from Genereux and Poilievre themselves about this specific situation.
And we have a source or sources that say that Genereux met with the Prime Minister, right?
Yes, from a senior Liberal source, they say that meeting happened earlier this week. And Conservative sources have also told CBC News, Andrew, that some people within the party were trying to convince Genereux to stay within the Conservatives as well. So still a lot of questions here for the Conservative Party. Of course, if Genereux, when Genereux leaves, whenever that official departure is, Poilievre says it will be in a couple of months from now. In the spring, he suggested that riding of Edmonton Riverbend, it will be vacant, and it's a riding that Genereux only won from the above the Conservatives. The Conservatives only won by a small margin over the Liberals there, so it could be a competitive seat for sure.
Olivia, thank you. That is the CBC's Olivia Stefanovich live in Ottawa. So for more on this, I'm joined by Charles Bird. He is a Liberal commentator and a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies, a public affairs firm. Charles, appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
So what do you make of this week that has happened? It's now Friday, and we've got a defection from the Conservatives to the Liberals and a resignation from a Conservative MP, resigning as an MP.
It's the kind of week that political observers tend to enjoy. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things still in action and yet to be resolved. I think the first point to be made is that it's obviously a significant challenge for Pierre Poilievre and an existential challenge in terms of his ability to continue on as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. I think one or two more defections and you may find that things become very, very difficult for him. And there are conversations going on. Conversations continue. There is widespread dissatisfaction, or at least some dissatisfaction within the Conservative caucus as to how things have unfolded, both in the context of the election campaign earlier this year and since then.
All right, so you say this is still very active. You say this is still going on. Now, if you say one or two more defections, you think that that's a possibility, and if that happens, if it's two, it's a Liberal majority government.
That's right. And also, this sort of thing tends to come with its own momentum, which is to say that one can lead to two, two can lead to four. You know, I think back to Stockwell Day's leadership in 2001, where no fewer than 12 then Canadian Alliance MPs left the caucus to sit as Alliance independents. And that ultimately forced Mr. Day's hand into calling a leadership convention, which he subsequently lost to Stephen Harper.
What would you say to the argument that the opposition House Leader Andrew Scheer made earlier today, that what Mark Carney is trying to do is to cobble together a majority through undemocratic means, through these pressure tactics by speaking with these Conservative MPs? Yeah,
I don't blame him for saying as much, but I honestly, I think the Prime Minister is a little bit frustrated that the key themes of the budget introduced earlier this week have largely been overshadowed by the politics of floor crossings and you know what the expectations around this budget were, when the budget itself is actually a very, very substantial document and one that bears closer examination. For instance, the Prime Minister was widely criticized for overhyping the budget, which he described as involving generational investments. But if the budget actually does unfold as it should, then it's entirely possible that we will see many hundreds of billions of dollars in private sector investment. And that's exactly what the Carney's game plan is, which is to diversify trade as much as possible away from the United States. And so this is a big roll of the dice, but it's substantive and it's real and it could work.
What would you say? And I appreciate that, he may be frustrated that, the focus is not on the budget, that maybe the Conservatives are frustrated that it's not on the budget as well for different reasons. But, we've talked a lot. I mean, we at the CBC have talked a lot about the budget, but we're also talking about this because it's important too, right?
Indeed.
If you have people resigning, if you have people crossing the floor from one party to the other, it changes the math of the House of Commons, it changes the makeup of the government. So that's why we're talking about it. What would you say to those voters in that rural Nova Scotia riding who are saying, wait a second, I didn't vote for a Liberal MP, I voted for a Conservative MP who is now a Liberal MP?
I think it's a legitimate concern on the part of some. No two voters are alike. They bring different perspectives, different opinions to these kinds of questions. What I will say is that our parliamentary democracy, as practiced in Canada and elsewhere, does bestow a member of parliament duly elected with a lot of decision-making ability with regards to individual pieces of legislation, or whether to continue to support his or her own leader, and also which party they want to be part of going forward. And, we've seen a lot of floor crossings over the years, over the decades in Canadian history. Of course, the most famous floor crosser of all was Winston Churchill, and so it's not without precedent, shall we say.
We also heard, that Andrew Scheer saying that, he thinks that the reason that this came to a head when it comes to the Genereux resignation just yesterday is because of these Liberal pressure tactics. What do you make of that kind of argument?
I get the sense that there are a lot of conversations happening. Whether those constitute pressure tactics, I don't know, because a conversation usually entails two people willingly talking. And it perhaps does speak to the fact that there are folks in the Conservative caucus who are unhappy, who are worried about how things are going, who may be worried about their own electoral fortunes. And so in terms of pressure tactics, I'm not so sure. I do know that when Mr. Genereux made public his letter of resignation, the first line was, "Please stop contacting my family." Right. And that is likely a reference to the fact that his family has been getting a lot of calls, some of them quite menacing, if not threatening, about his decision to leave. That is anyone's guess. I really couldn't say.
Okay. What do you think we should watch for in the next, the next week or so? I know the House isn't sitting, but as MPs go back to their constituencies, what do you think we should be watching for?
It's a very, very interesting time this break week, because MPs will be back in the ridings. A lot of them will be holding town halls or public gatherings to discuss what's in the budget. What I've heard in my conversations with MPs as recently as this afternoon is that there's not a lot of hue and cry coming from constituents. A number of MPs have reported like 3 or 4 people taking the time to email their thoughts on the budget, which suggests that the budget is not top of mind. It may be that the drama of both potential floor crossings and also whether the government actually survives. I think there's every reason to think that it will survive, but accidents happen. And as a result, that may be the most important thing to watch, which is, are we going to be into an election before Christmas?
Do you think we will be?
No, I don't, but anything is possible. This is politics.
Yeah. All right, Charles, thank you very much. Charles Bird is a Liberal commentator and a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies, a public affairs firm.